All right. Letter 47. It's a big one. Settle in. I'm glad to hear from these people who've been visiting you that you live on friendly terms with your slaves. It is just what one expects of an enlightened, cultivated person like yourself. They're slaves, people say. No, they're human beings. They're slaves, but they share the same roof as ourselves. They're slaves. No, they're friends, humble friends. They're slaves. Strictly speaking, they're out of fellow slaves. If you once reflect that fortune has as much power over us as over them. This is why I laugh at those who think it degrading for a man to eat with his slave. Why do you think it degrading? Only because the most arrogant of conventions has decreed that the master of the house be surrounded at his dinner by a crowd of slaves who have to stand around while he eats more than he can hold, loading an already distended belly in his monstrous greed until it proves incapable any longer of performing the function of a belly, at which point he expends more effort in vomiting everything up than he did in forcing it down. And all this time, the poor slaves are forbidden to move their lips to speak, let alone to eat. The slightest murmur is checked with a stick. Not even accidental sounds like a cough or a sneeze or a hiccup are let off a beating. All night they long go on standing about, dumb and hungry, paying grievously for any interruption. The result is that slaves who cannot talk before his face talk about him behind his back. The slaves of former days, however, whose mouths were not sealed up like this, who were able to make conversations not only in the presence of their master, but actually with him, were ready to bare their necks to the executioner for him, to divert on to themselves any danger that threatened him. They talked at dinner, but under torture they kept their mouths shut. It is just this high handed treatment which is responsible for the frequently heard saying, "You've as many enemies as you've slaves." They are not our enemies when we acquire them, we make them so. For the moment, I pass over other instances of our harsh and inhumane behavior. The way we abuse them as if we were beasts of burden instead of human beings. The way, for example, from the time we take our places on the dinner couches, one of them mops up the spittle and another stationed at the foot of the couch collects up the leavings of the drunken dinners. Another carves the costly game bird, slicing off choice pieces from the breast and rump with the unerring strokes of a trained hand. Unhappy man to exist for the one and only purpose of carving a fat bird in the proper style, although the person who learns the technique from sheer necessity is not quite so much to be pitied as the person who gives demonstrations of it for pleasure's sake. Another, the one who serves the wine, is got up like a girl and engaged in a struggle with his years. He cannot get away from his boyhood, but is dragged back to it all the time. Although he already has the figure of a soldier, he is kept free of hair by having it rubbed away or pulled out by the roots. His sleepless night is divided between his master's drunkenness and sexual pleasures, boy at the table, man in the bedroom. Another, who has the privilege of ratting each guest's character, has to go on standing where he is, poor fellow, and watch to see whose powers of flattery and absence of restraint and appetite or speech are to secure them an invitation for the following day. Add to these the caterers with their highly developed knowledge of their master's palate, the men who know the flavors that will sharpen his appetite, know what will appeal to his eyes, what novelties can tempt his stomach when it is becoming queasy, what dishes he will push aside with the eventual coming of sheer satiety, what he will have a craving for on that particular day. These are the people with whom a master cannot tolerate the thought of taking his dinner, assuming that to sit down at the same table with one of his slaves would nope, seriously impair his dignity. The very idea, he says, yet have a look at a number of masters he has from the ranks of these very slaves. Take Callistius. One time master, I saw him once actually standing waiting at Callistius's door refused admission while others were going inside, the very master who had attached a price ticket to the man and put him up for sale along with other rejects from his household staff. There's a slave who has paid his master back, one who was pushed into the first lot, two, the batch on which the auctioneer is merely trying out his voice. Now it was the slave's turn to strike his master off his list, to decide that he's not the sort of person he wants in his house. Callistius's master sold him, yes, and look how much it cost him. How about reflecting that the person you call your slave traces his origin back to the same stock as yourself? He, nope, has the same good sky above him, breathes as you do, lives as you do, dies as you do. It is as easy for you to see him a freeborn man as for him to see a slave in you. Remember the Varus disaster. Many a man of the most distinguished ancestry who was doing his military service as the first step on the road to a seat in the Senate was brought low by fortune, condemned by her to look after a steading, for example, or a flock of sheep. Now think contemptuously of these people's lot in life, in whose very place, for all your contempt, you could suddenly find yourself. I don't want to involve myself in an endless topic of debate by discussing the treatment of slaves, towards whom we Romans are exceptionally arrogant, harsh, and insulting. But the evidence of the advice I'd like to give is this: treat your inferiors in the way in which you would like to be treated by your own superiors. And whenever it strikes you how much power you have over your slave, let it also strike you that your own master has just as much power over you. I haven't got a master, you say. You're young yet. There's always the chance that you'll have one. Have you forgotten that? No. Have you forgotten the age at which Hecuba became a slave, or Croesus, or the mother of Darius, or Plato, or Diogenes? Be kind and courteous in your dealings with a slave. Bring him into your discussions and conversations and your company generally. And if at this point all those people who have been spoilt by luxury raise an outcry protesting, as they will, there couldn't be anything more degrading, anything more disgraceful. Let them just say that these are the very persons I will catch on occasion kissing the hand of someone else's slave. Don't you notice, too, how our ancestors took away all odium from the master's position and all that seemed insulting or degrading in the lot of the slave by calling the master father of the household and speaking of the slaves as members of the household, something which survives to this day in the mime? They instituted, too, a holiday on which master and slave were to eat together, not as the only day this could happen, of course, but as one on which it was always to happen. And in the household they allowed the slaves to hold official positions and to exercise some jurisdiction in it. In fact, they regarded the household as a miniature republic. Do you mean to say, comes the retort, that I'm to have each and every one of my slaves sitting at the table with me? Not at all, any more than you're to invite to it everybody who isn't a slave. You're quite mistaken, though, if you imagine that I'd bar from the table certain slaves on the grounds of the relatively menial or dirty nature of their work. The muleteer, for example, or that cowhand. I propose to value them according to their character, not their jobs. Each man has a character of his own choosing. It is chance or fate that decides his choice of job. Have some of them dine with you because they deserve it, others in order to make them so deserving. For if there's anything typical of the slave about them as a result of the low company they're used to living in, it will be rubbed off through association with men of better breeding. You needn't, my dear Lucilius, look for friends only in the city or the Senate. If you keep your eyes open, you'll find them in your own home. Good material often lies idle for want of someone to make use of it. Just give it a trial. A man who examines the saddle and bridle and not the animal itself when he is out to buy a horse is a fool. Similarly, Only an absolute fool values a man according to his clothes or according to his social position, which after all is only something that we wear like clothing. He's a slave, but he may have the spirit of a free man. He's a slave, but is that really to count against him? Show me a man who isn't a slave. One is a slave to sex, another to money, another to ambition. All are slaves to hope or fear. I could show you a man who has been on consul who is a slave to his little old woman, a millionaire who is the slave of a little girl in domestic service. I could show you some high aristocratic young men who are utter slaves to stage artistes, and there's no state of slavery more disgraceful than one which is self imposed. So you needn't allow yourself to be deterred by the snobbish people I've been talking about from showing good humor towards your slaves instead of adopting an attitude of arrogant superiority towards them. Have them respect you rather than fear you. Here, just because I've said they should respect the master rather than fear him, someone will tell us that I'm now inviting slaves to proclaim their freedom and bringing about their employer's overthrow. Are slaves to pay their respects like dependent followers of or early morning callers? That's what he means, I suppose. Anyone saying this forgets that what is enough for a god in the shape of worship cannot be too little for a master. To be really respected is to be loved, and love and fear will not mix. That's why I think you're absolutely right in not wishing to be feared by your slaves and in confining your lashings to verbal ones. As instruments of correction, beatings are for animals only. Besides, what annoys us does not necessarily do us any harm, but we masters are apt to be robbed of our senses by mere passing fancies to the point where our anger is called out by anything which fails to answer to our will. We assume the mental attitudes of tyrants, for they too forget their own strength and the helplessness of others and grow white hot with fury as if they had received an injury, when all the time they are quite immune from any such danger through the sheer exaltedness of their position. Nor indeed are they unaware of this, but it does not stop them seizing an opportunity of finding fault with an inferior and maltreating him for it. They receive an injury by way of excuse to do one themselves. But I won't keep you any longer. You don't need exhortation, exhortation. It is a mark of a good way of life that, among other things, it satisfies and abides. Bad behavior, constantly changing, not for the better, simply into different forms, has none of this stability. That's it.